I often look back towards my younger days, the days of being a literal babbling infant, and I think of the games that I used to play. Games that I've either long forgotten the names of, or games that I remember enjoying but ultimately remember nothing about, other than some positive feelings associated with them. One such game was Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith on the PS2. Given the state of Star Wars these days, I'm a little starved for some genuinely good Star Wars content worth having some literary discussion over. And since Knights of the Old Republic is kind of in development limbo at the time of writing, I decided to take a look at the old memory bank and talk about this strange entry in the Star Wars game lineup. I don't have the highest opinion regarding movie games, or games that are based on movies, yet it's Star Wars from its prime. I have to give it a decent look and see if my memories held up, or if the game is simply a lost product of its time. The weirdest part of Episode 3, which is how I'm going to refer to the game over the film, is the fact that it released almost a whole month before the movie hit theaters. Granted, when I was still hobbling back and forth between my local DVD rental shop, I never heard of nor seen the game until seeing the film in theaters. I never paid attention to a lot of these things, and if I'm being honest, I still don't. But I digress. The vague memories I had of the game up to this point were fighting the droidekas because I had a really hard time figuring out how to kill them, and the final fight between Anakin and Kenobi. I remembered that the game had, at least at the time, a very cool final cutscene for a what-if scenario if Anakin won the duel on Mustafar instead of Kenobi. Honestly, I still think it's cool, but for different reasons that I'll get into later. Episode 3's visual style is a blend of real footage from the film spliced in with some in-game rendered cutscenes. It's a little jarring to look at first, but I found myself getting used to it rather quickly. The only real issue is that there's a ton of content from the film that is not present in the game, so oftentimes between missions, the game will simply cut from one scene to the next with none of the content or context that would have normally existed between those two cuts. For example, when Anakin and Obi-Wan rescue Palpatine from Count Dooku, get captured by Grievous and are taken to the bridge, then Grievous escapes, all that whole shebang, and the ship is hurtling down to the planet, was still flying half a ship, right? That scene, that's not there. That's not present. They're falling out of space, and then suddenly in the next scene, Anakin and Kenobi are talking about Utapau in the Jedi Temple. It's incredibly jarring.
Cruiser like this? You mean, do I know how to land what's left of this thing?
Well,
under the circumstances, I'd say the ability to pilot this thing is irrelevant. Strap yourselves in. You're gonna need me on this one, Master.
I didn't edit that outside of speeding up the results screen. That's just how it goes. And it's like this for most mission transitions. The visuals themselves are about what you'd expect from a game in 2005. It was developed by the now-defunct subsidiary of LucasArts The Collective, whose entire gaming lineup from the late 90s until their closure in 2007 was almost exclusively movies, high-end games such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, and The Da Vinci Code, which I have. Why do I have this? Personally, I don't hate the look of Revenge of the Sith. I'm pretty nostalgic for these types of graphics. I think they did a pretty good job at capturing the overall aesthetic of the prequel-era Star Wars condensed into PS2 form. It was definitely an era of early facial mocap, so like the facial animations look a little uncanny, but the actual choreography and the animations that went into the move list of every Jedi in the game is really damn good. This is because Nick Gillard, who was the stunt coordinator and lightsaber choreographer for the prequels, was on staff during productions as both a consultant and as a boss later in the game. You get to fight the man himself, which I think that's genuinely awesome. The story itself follows 16 missions, with a 17th final mission being made available once the game has finished as the what-if scenario. If you've seen the movie, then you pretty much know the plot of the game. The back of the box boasts to take you beyond the film, including never-before-seen locations inspired by the film, end quote. And I'll give it that. They do in fact share some concepts that were cut from the film for one reason or another, such as the fuel pump room of General Grievous' ship. It was apparently an idea that they were going to have Kenobi and Anakin fight through some droids in a pump room, rapidly filling with fuel. That being said, the game does a lot of cuts of its own. For example, Padme isn't mentioned at all outside of one final moment in the final duel, just as an off comment by Anakin. And the youngling slaughter has been cut entirely. I can't believe they removed the biggest meme from the film. Sure, it's meant to be horrific, but it's also funny for the same reason people still laugh at dead baby jokes. The gameplay itself is meant to be a hack-and-slash character action type of game, playing either as Anakin or Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's akin to DMC or God of War, and for the most part, it doesn't suck. I could definitely see this being right up someone's alley of wanting a hack-and-slash Star Wars game. And honestly, the format works. A hack-and-slash Star Wars game could genuinely, absolutely work given the amount of lightsaber fighting styles that exist, type of lightsabers, different force powers. The closest we have besides Episode 3 would probably be Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast, but only by the loosest definitions of what a character action game is. And even then, I would argue that some of those are more of a light sandbox action game where the levels exist with some kind of gimmick, whereas Episode 3 is a little closer to what one might imagine when they think of a character action game. Its levels are fairly small and linear, and its move list is complex enough to offer some variety. Unfortunately, I find to be the case with most proto-action games, there are some glaring problems that make some parts feel more like an annoyance rather than a proper challenge. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The game starts in General Grievous's flagship, where Anakin and Obi-Wan are tasked with rescuing the kidnapped Chancellor Palpatine from Count Dooku. The area is easy enough to start as we fight through the box standard B1 battle droids and B2 super battle droids. They genuinely don't do much, and fighting them is akin to cannon fodder, but that's the point. They're not meant to be hard. Even the supers, which are basically demons in Republic Commando, are about the same as the little guys, just with a lot more health. This first level's a good idea of how the rest of the game structure will be laid out. Start the level, fight some things until reaching either a locked door that requires a button to be pressed, a lightsaber to cut through something, or an object or location that must be navigated via the Force with an indicator on the ground telling the player that it is a thing that needs to be interacted with. Then repeat the process until the level ends. The goal of the first level is to simply get to the other side of the hangar bay, which is teeming with battle droids and is covered in debris of destroyed gunships, where R2 will unlock the door to the hallways. Once the level completes, the results screen will show up and show how you did by awarding experience to the character as you played for that level. The XP gains are categorized into 4 groups: fair, good, impressive, and masterful respectively, with each awarding an increasing amount of experience to pump into certain move categories. There are also secrets, but I hardly found any of them because I wasn't looking for them. Some increase your maximum health or force energy, others max out your style meter, so to speak. While fighting, next to the main character icon on the HUD is a circular little meter that fills as you kill enemies and not getting hit. It's very similar to DMC's style meter. The higher the meter, the more experience that you'll gain from killing something. The skills are divided into 2 sections: force moves and combat moves. Both Obi-Wan and Anakin have separate experience pools, so there's no sharing experience. Throughout the game, I experimented with a few different moves to see what would be most effective, or at least useful, while playing. And of the force powers, the most that were useful to me were force push, force stun, and force heal. I didn't use force grab nor saber throw, because I didn't think they were all that good. They were mostly utility items at best, in my opinion. Of the combat moves, the only ones that I really used, or overused anyway, was grappling, because I'm basic. I'm also really bad at fighting games, but also because fighting the more complex enemies can be incredibly troublesome if I were to try and add a little extra variety, flourishes, or flair to the combo. Exhibit A: meet the grapple droid. It's a variation of the B2 super battle droid, but with just little grabby hands instead of guns. Its whole purpose is to bitch slap the player into the unknown regions of space. There are a lot of brutish-type enemies like this that have way more health than they should and want to hug the player until they snap the lumbar section of the player's spine. Back the hell up. I don't like you like that. I need an adult. Shit, I am the adult, and I can't deal with this on my own type shit. It's very stressful, and unfortunately there aren't a ton of ways to deal with this enemy type, as they have a habit of blocking just about every attack the player could throw at them. Thankfully, each of them are susceptible to at least 1 force power. Sometimes. See, force powers are incredibly finicky. Sometimes they'll target who you want them to. Great, absolute positive outcome. Sometimes they'll target somebody else entirely. Not an ideal outcome, but you know what, you're still doing something at least. Sometimes they'll target a spider on the wall that's on the other side of the room. Now, I don't like spiders as much as the next guy, but my spine is in danger of being removed out of my anus. Please look at the man in front of you. This is because Episode 3 does not have a lock-on system. Wait, I should reiterate. Episode 3 does not have a player-controlled hard lock-on system. The closest there is would be to block and hope that the character is targeting the enemy you would like to tickle. There are many instances where this feature would have saved my frustration by simply allowing me to deal with specific targets that I wanted to kill instead of just hoping to God that I won't lose too much health during any specific encounter. I swear, I am on my knees looking at the barrel of the star, just ready to give it the sloppiest top, but Kenobi won't look at it! Speaking of health, you lose health fairly quickly. Don't let the small amounts of damage deceive you. I'm convinced invulnerability frames don't exist. It's really easy for multiple damage sources to whittle down your health down to the size of a plank wood and a mouse paw. It's a splinter. Get it? Because, mice are tiny. Anyway. You might think it's not really a problem since Force Heal exists, and you'd be right to an extent. The problem doesn't come from the loss of life, but rather the time wasted sitting there waiting on the mana bar to regen. Yes, I called it a mana bar. They're space wizards. I'm going to keep calling it a mana bar from now on. Get over it or kiss me. My issue comes from having my time wasted while waiting for the mana bar to replenish. Call it a skill issue, and you're probably right. I'm sure there's someone who cares enough about this game to do hitless playthroughs, to which I say, hell yeah. But I personally haven't played this game for almost 20 years. Fuck, I'm old. 20 years. I don't know the ins and outs. I got hit a lot because I felt like it was incredibly hard to avoid damage from certain encounters. Primarily encounters with brute-type enemies who wanted to bane my Batman. Particularly a fight on Utapau before the boss fight with General Grievous, where this arena was just absolutely teeming with grapple droids, while being fired upon by several different sources. And don't even get me started on some of the mini-bosses. Fuck, now you've done it. Now I'm starting. I genuinely forgot that most of the mini-bosses exist in Episode 3 because they're some of the worst design abominations that I've ever had the displeasure of witnessing. Obi-Wan Kenobi is tracking Grievous in order to kill him in the name of peace. Behind this cannon rider, he met a droid spider, and it gaped his holes just a little bit wider. Do you find that confusing? That's how I felt fighting this damn thing. Smacking the droid does not cause it to flinch, and it shows this little blue shield, which makes me think, hey, it's not taking any damage by just straight up hitting it. The feedback indicated to me at the time that the droid is not taking damage. Alright, so there must be something else to do. Kenobi loves to give out instructions like Phil from whichever Kingdom Hearts wants you to jump on the Hydra's back. I think it's Kingdom Hearts 2, that would check out because that game's pretty boring. Kenobi gives the players instructions to get on the spider droid's back in order to deal damage. Okay, I start looking around for elevation points to jump up on the Hydra's back, to no avail because there are no places to jump upon said Hydra's back. Alright, so that's a fucking lie. There are also prompts that will give you instructions on how to perform certain moves at certain context-specific times. And pressing triangle and square at the same time would perform a grapple move. So you think, hey, this thing probably takes damage from grappling. No, because the character just bounces right off. So what the hell, right? How does this thing actually take damage? You have to specifically hit this thing in the eye. Pretty standard fare, considering eyes have been weaknesses for monster creatures for a really long time. But there are so many things working against the player for this fight, in particular from the game telling you to grapple way too early, before the player would even reasonably think to try and grapple the creature, from Kenobi telling the player to find a way to get on its back to damage it, and the minimal feedback received when trying to hit the creature in the first place. This isn't even mentioning how easy it can be to get stun-locked by this damn robot. When in front of its face, it'll do a swipe to push the player back off the ground. Getting up off the ground can take forever, and the droid's blaster takes about that long to charge and hit the player the moment they stand back up, knocking them back down and repeating the cycle anew. After defeating it, the game will ask you to fight the damn thing for a second time when pursuing Grievous, where it finally tells you that you need to hit it in the fucking eye. I genuinely don't know why I struggled so much with Kenobi's stages compared to Anakin's. Their movesets are fairly similar, at least in the way that their combos are structured. They're exactly the same button presses, just with different moves tied to those combos. Call me old-fashioned, but I would have preferred pretty much every enemy, minus the bosses and mini-bosses, to go down in only a few hits in order to reduce the amount of time spent in any given area, which is another gripe that I have. Some encounters, particular in Kenobi's levels, want to last longer than they should have any right to the point where I was just waiting for enemy spawn in order to kill them so I could move on, or just begging for enemies to stop coming because they just kept coming and I wanted to move on. Reduce the amount of hits on most enemies to the point where the player isn't beating a metal trash can with a bat for a solid 10 minutes, and provide a greater emphasis on the lightsaber duels. Duels are some of the best moments that I had while playing. There are 6 in total over the course of the main plot, with the first being Count Dooku. They typically take place in one decently sized arena and usually only contain the two, fighting with very little in the way of additional enemies. I say very little because Count Dooku's fight did contain some ads in the form of some B2s showing up, which is a little upsetting. I know they show up in the movie and all, but they don't actually have to participate during the game. Ads, for the most part, detract from the grand majority of fights that they take place in, with one stipulation. They must contribute to the core flow of the fight in some meaningful way. If they're just there to add an additional obstacle, they're annoying, pointless, and cause the real fight to be watered down. The argument certainly exists that the ads being in place are intended for the fight, which I must retort, no. I'm not exactly the most tech-savvy when it comes to game development, but I can imagine that the AI and mechanics for a boss fight are not programmed, in most cases, with the notion that there will be additional enemies in the fighting arena, and that ads are a last-minute thought, again, most of the time, to add difficulty to a boss fight that might be seen as too easy. For the instance of Anakin's duel with Dooku, I would argue that there's no need to make the fight more difficult because he's the first real boss in the game. Just let the player figure out what fighting against another lightsaber user is like. Let them get a real taste of what the dueling arena is like before trying to make things too difficult right off the bat. This isn't Elden Ring, and even Elden Ring doesn't do ads on the literal first boss fight of the game. All that being said, when fighting Count Dooku, he's alright. He's more passive than most of the other bosses, but that's typical of a tutorial boss. It did feel like a genuine duel versus an elegant duelist, which he's meant to be. Of all the duels, save one, I thought were pretty fun, but I'll get to that. I felt that Anakin's duel with Mace Windu was probably the best duel in the entire game. Everything fit perfectly in such a way that hits all of the good spots in my brain. It scratches that good itch, so to speak. Mace Windu is an aggressive duelist, always on the attack. It's in Palpatine's office, who had just been exposed as the Sith Lord, causing problems for the Jedi up to this point. It's Anakin's moment where he officially becomes Vader. The music during the fight reflects this as well, with playing hints of Vader's theme throughout, all while Anakin and Windu are fighting in the rain, with Windu desperately trying to convince Anakin that the Chancellor is a bad man. And the words that Anakin uses during this fight when making his argument, in a sense, even though that they're misguided as hell, saying things like, "All I see are the Jedi trying to assassinate a politician," which, yes, that is exactly what it looks like on the outside. The problem with this point of view is that Anakin is an idiot. The AI is fairly forgiving, or is just jank, so I did notice a lot of moments where I should have lost, where Windu just didn't attack, which allowed me to gain some extra footing. But I imagine higher difficulties would have his AI take advantage of these moments. But all around, I would consider the duel with Mace Windu to be the best. The worst would have to be Anakin's duel with Sindralic, because it's an incredibly fucking annoying fight. A tactic that I have found that works for most duels would be to back away in order to get a tick of healing if I ever got low on health. It would never be by much, but it would be enough to keep me in the fight before getting attacked. Sindralic, for whatever reason, preferred to prevent me whenever possible in the most annoying way that he could, by force grabbing me every time I got a certain distance from him and chucking me to the other side of the arena, then doing it again because I was still far enough away that it would trigger this move. I swear to God, I felt like Gandalf getting tossed all over this fucking room. This one move just made the fight take a lot longer than it had any reason to. Attempting to attack him with any move would normally result in the move either being blocked or being interrupted mid-attack with a combo of his own. He was also the first to utilize a combo that could not be blocked. This meant being close to him resulted in losing health rapidly, while being far away resulted in that one scene from Freddy vs. Jason where Jason got tossed around by Freddy like a pinball machine. The only tactic that seemed to work was abusing grappling in order to actually deal some damage and have a few seconds to breathe. A tactic that I hadn't felt a reason to use or abuse in any fight up to this point. These feelings of frustration are only compounded by the fact that this is some nothing Jedi that was introduced specifically for this game to have a boss fight during Operation Nightfall, which is probably the best level in the game in terms of theme. Anakin had just become Vader, and it was time to show off how strong he had become in the dark side by slaughtering the Jedi Temple. What makes Sindralig more disappointing is that there was already a perfectly good candidate for a boss during this chapter, and the librarian Jocasta Nu, aka the bitch that told Kenobi that Camino doesn't exist because it's not in the archive. We already knew her, we already hated her, let's just have her be the fight instead of this random dude who was invented just for the sake of this game, in what was considered one of the most notable moments in the entire franchise. What's crazy is Jocasta Nu's death in this scene is considered legends, as in canon she survived the initial attack on the Jedi Temple just to end up dying to Darth Vader after his defeat on Mustafar. Her death by the hands of Pre-Suit Vader is a more true-to-character outcome for Anakin because she protected the library's contents heavily from people who didn't have the authorization to view certain subjects. But to have her death be in a cutscene as opposed to show her actually defending the library, I feel has less of an impact. I think it would have been cool to see Jocasta Nu attempt to show Anakin that he was in fact not ready to see what he so desperately wanted to see in the Master Archive due to his fractured and fragile mental state. That way, when she is ultimately killed by Anakin, it feeds into his ego, thinking that if someone so determined to defeat him would still be killed, then there's genuinely nothing he shouldn't have the right to possess. But that's just my 2 cents on this 20-year-old game of a 50-year-old franchise. I'm almost 30 and I think maybe I think about Star Wars too much. Alec Guinness might have been right. Anyway, it's not that I'm completely opposed to a new character being made up just for a fight. It's more that a character was made up for such a historic moment who is meant to be in a pretty high position of power within the function of the Jedi Temple. Someone we've never heard of prior and who wouldn't even appear in the movie following nearly a month after the game's release. I know Sindralig also has like 1 or 2 appearances in the Clone Wars animated, but that's at minimum at least 3 years after his debut in this game. I'm going to backtrack a little bit to when I mentioned Mustafar so I can speak positively again. Anakin's mission on Mustafar was a pretty interesting level to play through. I enjoy playing as Pre-Suit Vader and seeing what he was up to when he wasn't killing younglings at the temple or being burned alive by Kenobi. He didn't have a ton of missions before donning the suit, but I enjoyed seeing more in-depth Sidious's orders to assassinate the leaders of the Separatist Alliance on Mustafar. I don't think I would have enjoyed this final sequence anywhere near as much if the game had simply just started with Kenobi holding the stance, and suddenly it's go time. Besides, since the youngling murder wasn't present, we had to see some other acts of cruelty being committed by Anakin before his final defeat. The final duel on Mustafar I felt could have been a lot better than what was presented. I imagine that as you level each character, Anakin would possess moves that you pumped into him for the final fight, but he doesn't really use them a lot. They're used very sparingly and tend to do very little damage for how much experience has been used to acquire some of them. I didn't see much variety in his combos to the point that I just felt like he was a watered-down version of Mace Windu. Still good, but not as good. Once the duel ends with Anakin being burned alive in a river of lava, it immediately cuts to him in the suit as per norm for the game. No pomp, no circumstance, nothing. I imagine it's because Padme just isn't in the game, so they couldn't show anything that happened afterward. The one aspect that the final duel has over any other duel is the 17th mission. I did mention at the start of this that the game contains 16 missions throughout with a final 17th. The 17th mission is without a doubt one of the most interesting things Star Wars fans could have ever gotten up to this point. It's a repeat of the duel on Mustafar, but this time we play as Anakin instead of Kenobi. 10-year-old me was fascinated with this development, and I still am to an extent. The fight is exactly the same, if not easier for having done it already. Once Anakin defeats Kenobi at the same river of lava, Sidious arrives on the planet to congratulate Vader on a job well done, and to present him his new lightsaber. Vader then kills Sidious with it, and assumes the title of Emperor for himself. At the time, this was fascinating because it's a plausible what-if scenario that I think has gotten both better and worse as time has passed. Better in the sense that I do believe a Pre-Suit Vader has a real chance of killing old Nutsack there, but worse because of the way that it's presented to make it look too easy. As if Sidious doesn't have contingency after contingency for any possible betrayal or unforeseen incidences on top of being a skilled duelist in his own right, nearly besting Yoda himself. That's debatable, but it's also not what I'm here to talk about. The point is, he's very good with a sword. I personally have a hard time believing that the character who is meant to be the literal embodiment of evil, the literal devil, doesn't have a plan for a crybaby like Anakin suddenly lashing out and trying to kill him. I would have loved to see one final duel with Sidious afterwards. Much harder than any other duel in the game. It doesn't even have to be fair, considering it's just a what-if scenario. Failing could result in Vader being tossed in the suit anyway, or just dying. But winning could have been an incredible hit of dopamine. I think I'm about ready to wrap this up. I've said most of what I care to say about Episode 3. Overall, I do think it's a good game that I have my problems with. If it were to release after the movie, give it a whole other month of development, maybe a little more even, I bet a lot of my issues would have been worked out along with some additional features. Speaking of additional features, before I forget, this game does have some multiplayer cooperative missions in versus mode. I didn't play any of them because I have only one control, and 0 friends interested in doing this thing that could reasonably do it. There's also a lot of concept art I had a good time sifting through, and a few other special features, if one were interested enough, they could have a field day with. It's very clear that a lot of love went into this project, and I think it just came out more than it was meant to. Which is a trend that still perpetuates to this day. My name is Bucks. Please like and subscribe, and have yourselves a wonderful day.